All right. Welcome to another edition of This Week in Drones. We are live here on Thursdays, 1 p.m. Eastern, and we've got a great lineup today talking about the policies that matter for drones and AAM. We're coming up next week for the Drone and AAM Policy Symposium put on by AUVSI. And so as folks are signing in today to the live show, I want you to be just thinking about this topic, right? The policies, what policies matter, what regulations matter when it comes to enabling drones and AAM in integration into the national airspace. There's going to be all sorts of speakers and topics coming next week, which the folks here on the panel are going to be attending in person, and a lot of folks are going to be actually sharing from the stage from different panels. We'll get into some of those topics. But really the goal today is to spark conversation up to that in-person event next week. I hope you're coming. And if you'd like to come, but you've not registered for it yet, I wanted to actually pull this up. We've got, for friends of the podcast here, we've got a discount code here at the bottom of the screen, $50 off industry registration. So jump on today and register to attend the event. We'd love to see you there. And I also wanted to shout out for American Robotics, who is sponsoring this episode, and this wouldn't be possible without you guys, Tim and Susan and Eric and the crew. So definitely go check them out as well, and their autonomous drone system, which they can share about here in a few minutes. But with that, I am joined by an amazing panel. We've got our regulars that you'll recognize: Michelle Duquette with 3 Mad Air, aviation specialist, and then of course Brandon Youngblood with Drone Security Services, former FAA, counter UAS, all of the different groups that needed counter UAS approvals and running missions back in the day had to run it through Brandon's desk. And so he's seen it all and can answer questions in that regard. And then I'll let our 3 guests introduce themselves as well. And I'll just go, I'll throw it to you, Tim, and then Scott, and then we'll end with Max. And then Max, I'll have you, if you don't mind, after your introduction as well, just to kind of share a brief take on the event this year, since obviously you're with the AUVSI and you got the vision for the event. But Tim, I'll pass to you for an introduction, share who you are, and also some comments on American Robotics and what you guys are doing for the industry.
Sure. Thanks for having me here, David. And great to be part of the panel here today. And so Tim Tenney, CEO of American Robotics, part of the Ondas Autonomous Systems corporate headquarters. We have autonomous drone in a box, counter UAS systems, as well as a complete product line to support the customer and their unmanned aircraft systems needs and services. And I think you wanted to talk about, what do we want to get out of the event this year? I mean, we talked about it shifting from Baltimore to DC. I think that's a good thing. It allows more FAA leadership and frontline workers to attend so that they can engage industry. And so hoping to see a big turnout from the 3 pillars of flight standards, air traffic organization, and aircraft certification, not just the drone integration office there, to be able to see and engage the industry. Because that's a key component when these regulations come out, for us to be able to professionalize ourselves as airmen. So I look forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tim. Over to you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's great to be here. This is my first time on your podcast, so thanks for having me. I'm Scott O'Brien. I lead public policy for Reliable Robotics. Our company is based in Mountain View, California, and we are working on safety-enhancing technology and aircraft autonomy for cargo use cases, both in the commercial world and in the military. Our primary project is working on bringing a remote piloting capability to the Cessna 208 Caravan, which is a single-engine turboprop, 8,000-pound aircraft, can transport 3,000 pounds of cargo. So we are working to get a supplemental type certificate from the FAA to enable that aircraft to be remotely piloted. And similar to what Tim said, I think that just even in the past 3 months, I've seen an incredible acceleration of FAA work across lines of business to introduce remotely piloted aircraft into the NAS. So I know that we're going to have representatives from ATO and flight standards there who will be crucial, because unlike kind of legacy aircraft certification projects where you're certifying a box or something to put on a plane, these technologies are going to have impacts on ATO and flight standards. So we have to be working together with them throughout the project. And I think thanks to AUVSI's work, we've really accelerated that activity over the past few months. So it'll be great to hear directly from folks in DC next week.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott. And then Max, I'm going to pass it over to you. And before I do, just remember, folks out there, if you're watching live, please send in comments, questions for this panel. These are industry experts, and we've got them all in one place at one time. And would love to be able to bounce some of your thoughts, burning questions about the industry, about upcoming regulations and different policy impacts that you may have. Even send in a comment if you're going to be at the AUVSI symposium next week, so that folks know who's going to be there. We can meet up in person. And Max, I'll send it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, David. Good to see everyone. Max Rosen. I'm Associate Vice President of Government Affairs for AUVSI, the Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International. And for those who don't know, we're the world's largest trade association that is dedicated to the advancement of uncrewed systems, autonomy, and robotics. I have the pleasure of working with every individual here, in addition to hundreds of other companies that are focused on integrating UAS, counter UAS, advanced air mobility systems into the national airspace. I do a lot of work with Congress, a lot of work with the executive branch, advancing common sense legislation and regulations to help improve the UAS landscape here in the United States, improve the industrial base, lessen our reliance on foreign adversaries, and do everything we can to just create as robust of a drone ecosystem, drone and AAM ecosystem here in the United States as possible. So I'm a registered lobbyist. I talk to the federal government pretty much all day, every day. But internally at AUVSI, I manage our Air Advocacy Committee, which Reliable Robotics sits on, which Michelle sits on in various capacities, which David sits on, and many, many others that I'm sure are listening actively sit on and participate in that committee. And we're really appreciative of all the work and all the time that you all put into our organization and the issues that we work on. So to shift gears to the Drone and AAM Policy Symposium, which we are referring to here at AUVSI as DAPS, DAPS. So if you hear us say DAPS, we are talking about the Drone and AAM Policy Symposium. But if you may recall, we've held this event for several years. But in the last couple of years and in recent history, it's been in Baltimore, Maryland at the Baltimore Convention Center. We used to host this event in a formal partnership with the Federal Aviation Administration, with the FAA. And this year is the first year where we, AUVSI, are planning the event solely on our own. So we're able to sort of, control the programming, control the keynotes, control a lot of the, information and work and programming and education that goes into the event and its success. And our first order of business, I think, was identifying a new location for the event. Nothing against Baltimore and holding it there, but it's a little bit far from DC. And I think to David's point, it did, or whomever said it, it did limit the ability of some federal officials to attend the event because it was 40, 50 miles away from Washington, D.C. So in addition to Nationals Park being a very cool venue, I personally didn't know that you could even hold events at Nationals Park until we started the planning process for this event. So I'm really excited about that. But in addition to it being a very quality and just very cool venue, it was very strategically selected, right? For those who are familiar with the area, it's probably about 100 yards from the Department of Transportation headquarters. So, there's really no excuse for our friends at DOT and FAA to not to just walk right up the street and attend our event. So it was very, very strategically placed to try to maximize government participation. And I was telling the other folks here on the panel before we started the podcast here, our target as an organization was to have roughly 10 federal agencies attend the event. And I think right now we're at about 13 or 14 federal agencies that will be attending, which include FAA, DOT, DOD, Department of Commerce, FCC, NIST, and many, many others. But then I think additionally, for those who are familiar with the area, again, Nats Park is located very close to Capitol Hill. It's about a 10 or 15 minute walk from the House side of Capitol Hill. So we've sent out invitations to probably close to 1,000 congressional staff. And we've really cast a wide net of individuals that we want to attend across key committees on Capitol Hill, key congressional offices, and key geographic locations where a lot of our member companies and a lot of the industry has a big footprint. So we're expecting a big congressional turnout, both from an attendee standpoint, but also from a programming standpoint. We have a great congressional panel next week that I'll be moderating with an individual on the Judiciary Committee, an individual who works in Rudy Yakim's office, who is the one of the co-chairs of the Unmanned Systems Caucus in Congress, and then an individual from the House Science Committee who has jurisdiction over a lot of UAS R&D and aerospace-related issues. So it's going to be a great event. We're super excited. We have a couple live drone demonstrations, which, again, if you're familiar with the DC area, not a lot of drone flights happening in and around the DC area for obvious reasons, but we've been able to work with the regulators to get clearances to do some cool drone deliveries in and around National Park. So we're really excited for the event. It's trending in a really positive direction from an attendance standpoint. A lot of great keynotes and programming for you all to tune into next week. For those who are part of the Air Advocacy Committee that I manage, we'll also have a couple of Air Advocacy Committee meetings where we'll have some government officials joining us as guest speakers. So overall, it's really shaping up to be a great event. If you've not registered, please do so as soon as you can. And we're really looking forward to seeing everybody on site at Nationals Park Tuesday and Wednesday of next week.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. Really appreciate it. So with that said, great context for that. T3, I wanted to see if you could help us out as you know, from your perspective as an operator, as a manufacturer. I wanted to hear a little bit more about, you know, the fully automated robotic data platform that you guys have put out, right? This first FAA approved fully automated drone system. And so you're going to be, you know, you're able to fly fully autonomous, unattended, constant flights. And there's all sorts of technology involved. But I think to be able to do that at scale across the entire country, we're going to need a whole lot in terms of regulation and policies and maybe perhaps Part 108. And I just kind of want to hear, you know, anything you want to share just for context about, you know, how that system works, but then also what your mentality is going into this symposium. I mean, are there certain aspects of regulation or policy that you're really going to be focusing in on that are going to help enable your systems? And so people can kind of start thinking about that.
Absolutely. So our system is, better known as the 6,000-pound Roomba vacuum cleaner, right? So it sits in its dock and doesn't look very interesting, but multiple times it's commanded to go out and do different things, whether it's safety, security, inspection. We have the only system that can swap up to 10 payloads and 11 batteries by a robotic arm and be back in the air in about 5 minutes or less. And we demonstrated that very, very well in New York City and Central Park over the winter when the temperatures got down below zero, and for a safety security role. And we'll be doing the same thing for customer protecting America's water supplies at a large reservoir in South Carolina, where we deploy it. And the deployment happens where we can put this in the middle of nowhere in a very rural environment. In South Carolina, where we're going to put it, it's literally about 50 miles from the nearest town of being able to operate. So we actually operate it from a city that's about 100 miles away. And we operate it autonomously, remotely. As long as we can gain connection to the system, we can operate it for the customer from our headquarters in Baltimore. So it does all of those things very, very well. But what really drives the customer is that thing you talked about. We worked with the regulator upfront early and brought them in close to be able to get the first drone in a box type certification under a rotorcraft airworthiness certificate. Because as we know, as we're talking about here, the regulations have not caught up to small UAS or large UAS for that, over 55 pounds or under. So, this event is part of continuing that FAA momentum. Mosaic, look at that this past week. Incredible, right? So another key opener of the industry. Part 108 will be another key opener of the industry so that we don't have to fill out multiple waivers and exemptions to be able to enable that autonomy. But we need to do it together. I mean, drones are an aircraft. We proved that way back when I was at FAA headquarters and stood up the drone integration office with Earl Lawrence and others, and started writing Part 107. That it's our shared airspace. So we need to operate safely and professionally together. And that's the kind of products we create. So they're built with engineering support, but with a lot of aviation operational experience that go around it. And so in addition to the autonomous drone in a box system, we have a counter UAS radar that does low kinetic net and parachute capture. We're actually testing that with a partner right here in Maryland this week, and we're going to show it off in a major city here coming up in August. And that's fully autonomous. And I think it was brought up early in our discussions, maybe before we kicked off the podcast amongst us, of the importance of being able to not just detect, but to mitigate systems. And that's our third product. So the Kestrel is our drone detect and avoid system, as well as our counter UAS passive detection system, which has active radar panels and passive RF detection. So it enables that drone in a box to be able to go beyond visual line of sight and deconflict itself with both cooperative and non-cooperative traffic. But all of that together brings an incredible solution to our exact same customers. Not only do they want drones out to do work that's dull, dirty, dangerous, they also want drones to be out there to protect our critical infrastructure. And all of those things are going to require working with the FAA, DOT, DHS, TSA, who's leading counter UAS for the country on behalf of the executive branch. So all of those things need to come together. So to hear that you have 14 agencies, I hope DHS and TSA are one of them. I'm sure they are, being part of this great opportunity to bring the really the expertise around the nation and internationally together.
That's great. Is there anything in that you anticipate or hope for in Part 108? No one knowing exactly what it's going to include, but
yeah, I mean, what I hope is that the industry is professionalizing itself to meet the requirements of Part 108. I mean, those of us that are airmen, I have 15,000 hours in about 11 different aircraft, and been in Part 121, 135, all the way down, and that's been a hindrance. We like to always point fingers at the regulator, but we also have to point fingers inward as well. So we both need to be part of that safety equation. And Part 108, for those of us that have watched its evolution, a lot of that was in the original Part 107 that got pushed down when we came out with the final rule. So safety management systems, having airmen that have training and have credentials and have currency and proficiency standards, and having aircraft that are certifiable to a regulator standard. Because as we know, not just the FAA works in a vacuum. We work to the standards of the International Civil Aviation Organization as a member nation. So to be able to harmonize regulations, most of our companies don't just work in the US. We work with our partners around the world, Canada, Europe, et cetera. So I think that's really, really important when industry and regulators come together, that they partner and don't look at each other as enemies, right? So that's really, really important. That's what keeps aviation safe: integrity and professionalism. So like to see a lot of that this coming week.
That's great. I feel like, and Michelle, it looks like you have a comment. I was going to pass it next to Scott, but actually go ahead if you had a comment there or question.
Tim, one thing I think you might want to maybe foot stomp a little bit more is that global learning that you've been fortunate enough, because you're deployed in other countries, the learning that you can bring back that will help us shape and inform those policies that you're talking about. So when we go into this conference next week, you might be able to bring some learning that will trigger maybe a different thought on how to go after some of these enablers that we need.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great insight. And I mean, to follow up on that, the other thing that we're probably all hoping that we see at the conference next week are new starts, new companies, new people coming into the industry. As we saw in the past year or two, as investment has tightened around UAS and drone OEMs, we've seen consolidation of leadership, of products, of services. But I think we always want to keep continuing to move that needle and being able to share that knowledge more quickly than a lot of us in the industry. When you started out, it was brand new, right? A decade ago. And now we've got a lot of experience and maturity, just on this panel here. So that'll be good to see as well. Thanks, Michelle.
That's great. And so, Scott, I feel like, Tim referenced a couple things that relate directly to you guys as well in terms of the type of aircraft that needs to be certified. And I think you guys are obviously, and you could share a lot more detail, but the systems that you've created to be able to fly, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but existing aircraft that are already approved by the FAA, but you're able to automate and create like a full automated from, taxiing to takeoff, flight to landing, the whole spectrum that Reliable Robotics is deploying. So I'm kind of curious to hear, some of your takeoff of comments that Timothy made, and then, what you guys are leaning into for next week regarding, integrating autonomous and remotely piloted operations into the NAS.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
sure. Yeah, I think Tim did a good job of setting up some of the policy areas that we're really interested in. I think it's great to see the smaller drone industry like having this level of professionalism and thoughtfulness to airspace integration. I think that's great to see, because that obviously makes things better for everybody and makes the NAS safer. But specific to our project, yeah, so we are looking to modify an existing Part 23 aircraft. So the Cessna Caravan's been around for a while. 3,000 of them are out there. So we are basically installing a continuous engagement autopilot system in the aircraft that's highly redundant. Nothing like this has actually really been certified in a Part 23 aircraft before. There are things like Garmin Autoland. What's different about our system is it's obviously not an emergency use only system. It's designed to be used every day. So that necessitates, triple redundant flight computers, dual redundant actuator strings, things that you haven't really seen anybody attempt to certify in a Part 23 aircraft. So that is really exciting, and obviously brings tremendous safety improvements, because in these aircraft, they're single pilots. So there's unfortunately control of flight into terrain, loss of control in flight. We see accidents, in Caravans and commercial Part 135 operations. So our technology, fully protects the flight envelope, avoids terrain, enables safe auto landing. So that in and of itself is really exciting. Just the safety benefits is going to bring to Part 135 and general aviation operations is great. Then in terms of the remotely piloted areas, I think that's more kind of lining up with what Tim was talking about. So we are developing an air-to-air radar that's going to perform our detect and avoid functions, leveraging ACAS-X. Again, I think this is an area that's fairly novel that people haven't done and tried to apply this to an existing aircraft. And again, like ACAS-X, investing in that, getting those standards across the finish line, that has benefits to everyone in the NAS and will significantly enhance safety. So that is an exciting part of our project. And we have a ground control station and a redundant C2 link. So those three items are really what takes the continuous engagement autopilot we have on the C208 and makes it a remotely piloted aircraft system. I think another thing to really focus on is making sure that pilots and aviators are involved in this operation. So we have a remote pilot who will be managing flight plan, talking to ATC. So there's always a pilot in the loop in our operation, because the goal of what we're really doing is we are, trying to take some of the lessons learned, I'd say, from the past 10 years of small UAS and make sure that the system we're certifying can be integrated into the NAS. Our ConOps is to operate in IFR on a flight plan between existing airports. So that's why we're going to need detect and avoid technology that leverages industry standards, be able to communicate with ATC in real time, all the things that someone flying a cargo aircraft does today, we're going to do. Just those tasks are going to be performed by the remote pilot. So in terms of next week, like I said earlier, I think what I'm most excited to hear about is the work that especially ATO and flight standards have done to really get more integrated into these advanced automation and autonomy certification projects. I think we're going to have a number of panels where we hear directly from the FAA about the work they're doing to make sure there's a path to integrate these ops into the NAS, enable some potential early pre-STC operations, which is really exciting, in line with some of the executive orders we've seen recently from the Trump administration. So I think things are coming together really well for this segment of the industry, thanks to, again, I think a lot of the work actually that's happened with small UAS is providing some really important lessons learned for the FAA to move forward on the type of technology we're working on.
Michelle, I saw you nodding your head.
So I have a question. Scott, as you characterize the products that you're developing, I'm hearing you characterize with the word remotely piloted, which I think is very appropriate for where we are right now. Are you also looking for language in any of these policies that allows you to take that next step towards semi-autonomous?
Yeah, I mean, for our project, I think looking at the regulatory landscape of where we are today, it's important to have a pilot in the loop for the operation. I think longer term, when you look at things like digital flight that would really transition how the NASA is managed and allow V2V communication and cooperative detect and avoid, I think then, Michelle, you can get into what you're thinking about to have something be like more autonomous. I mean, I think the term autonomous is used in lots of different ways. Like, so our aircraft does things autonomously, like manage contingencies, perform DAA maneuvers, but my opinion is like, I don't think our airspace is set up right now to enable like a true autonomous operation. I think that would be a real challenge with our voice comm system and lots of things. So to me, the unlock to that is to get the administration and the FAA behind something like digital flight, which is obviously a long, 10, 15-year project, but these things have to start somewhere. And I think that being, a priority once we get our ATC system, like kind of fix the things that are broken now, that being the next priority seems really important in how you unlock like a true like autonomous operation.
Okay.
Tim, did you have something off that?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue for both Reliable and for American Robotics and other drone companies. I mean, really to unlock autonomy at the next level before we go truly pilotless. I don't know if I'm in favor of pilot not in the loop, but I'd like to see one to many, right? One to multiple. And I know Reliable would like to see that as well as I'd like to have one remote piloting command that can operate, 5 to 10 systems. And the FAA has actually been doing good testing and research and development to start building those standards and partnering with the industry around it, because that's where we really unlock value of that autonomy and that technology stacks that we're building. But in the end, that next level, I mean, we just have read in the papers here lately, right? So there's a manpower shortage with air traffic organization. There's upgrading World War II air surveillance radars and getting to what I like to call next gen, now that we're still not there yet. And I think Brandon's smiling about that because, we were at FAA, that's exactly what's called next gen 1, and we're still not there. So I think that really unlocks value, not just for the companies, but for our customers. I mean, quite frankly, from a drone perspective, a little different than Reliable. They want that cargo and that caravan for FedEx, et cetera, to get from A to B safely, efficiently as possible. For us, it's automated data solutions, right? So, I mean, customers don't per se want a drone, but they want something that efficiently and effectively gives them accurate, reliable, and actionable data. And so if we can turn that on, we can increase safety around their human workforce. There may be gaps where there's not personnel to hire to do these jobs. So having one to many is a really, really important next step. And again, I think that's both industry showing its progression around professionalism and the regulator coming together to say, okay, these are going to be those baseline requirements. And things that Reliable are doing of leading the industry are going to come back to help the small UAS companies, leading those RTCA committees and setting those standards that trickle down. That radar that they're putting on their aircraft. I mean, gosh, just hearing them say that, I'm like, is that something we could use on the ground for detect and avoid for throughout a state or a region to do detect and avoid for small UAS as well? So we can help one another. So I think there's a lot of goodness from it.
I like how both of you have done that. You've characterized learning by doing, and that's exactly what's going to show us what that path forward needs to look like. We've got to get out there and we've got to do a little bit more than write the papers, right? Well done.
And I think the FAA has done a really good job, and we'll hear about this more next week, of providing, hopefully in the future, some opportunities to do these early operations in a way that, are aligned with the certification development of a company. Because I think one of the things that's been hard, some of the prior early operations ideas have been more like R&D and not maybe as aligned with something that's certifiable. I think the agencies come a long way in understanding the importance of the operations truly needing to be something that is representative of how you're going to integrate in the nest to bring along, all the stakeholders from the FAA. So that's one of the things I'm looking forward to hearing about, and I do think like is a big area of progress we've been making with the agency as an industry.
Yeah. And I think if I could add on to that, even with the FAA entire workforce focused on rulemaking, this is another learning, to get back to what Michelle said, of teaching the industry. We still are bound by law and USC 5 Administrative Procedures Act, and how we need to push a new regulation through, whether it's change, updated, deleted, and a new start regulation. And that takes 2 to 3 years to get there without an emergency executive order or a push. But even to go quickly, when we did the drone registration rule, it was done in about 9 weeks. It took a lot of resources to do that, while in parallel doing Part 107, signing thousands of 333 exemptions that were occurring at the same time. But if we look at any administration in a 4-year period, a department is, 3, maybe 4 rules that aren't contentious to get them through, whether we're change, adding, or starting new. And just looking at the track record right now with Mosaic, with Part 108 in the pipeline, with some other things, I mean, the industry should be pretty impressed with DOT and FAA and where they're working. But that comes from working together, because if we're not, we're usually taking those regulations to court to counter them, right? So it's really, really important that we work together and understand that there is a process to go from idea to notice for public rulemaking all the way through to that final rule or regulation that gets there.
So question then, as we go into next week and we're having all of these panels talking about these various topic areas, and we're hoping that there will be people in those audiences that have some level of influence on shaping what the next level of legislation will be. Are we seeing enough of that kind of language, Tim? We're seeing more and more of federal governments, thou shalt collaborate and coordinate together. You have no problem calling them out and telling them that they need to do that. But perhaps there's an industry component here that's not quite strong enough. From what I'm hearing, I think we need more.
Yeah, well, I think we need to vary it a bit, right? So I think we all agree we see some of the same faces on some of these panels, some of these committees, et cetera. We need to help shepherd and mentor and bring in some of those new industry members. That new drone startup might have someone who is an airline transport pilot and worked for Delta Airlines for 30 years, right? So that's somebody I want on my panel to be able to bring that aviation knowledge in and be able to bring a different perspective that's into it. I think there are some smaller companies and organizations that don't understand how they can get involved or become part of those panels, or even just get their thoughts across. And that's where AUVSI comes in to help foster that from a mentorship standpoint. But that's also the regulators' outreach. We have the FAST teams in the FAA for general aviation that go out and talk about how to make general aviation safer. I think we need to do a lot of that FAST team effort on the regulator side to be able to foster that in the industry and let them know that, hey, we're not your enemy, we're a partner. Bring us in early. We'll show you who to speak with, what panels to be part of, and we want to get your thoughts. We want to be open to that. It goes back to your shared learning from the first comments you made here today.
Max,
I think just to add to that, it's incumbent upon us as a trade association that represents such a broad swath of the industry to pull on those threads that are created at events like the Drone and AAM Policy Symposium next week, right? Like, there will be a lot of decision makers, there will be a lot of influencers, both from the congressional side and the regulatory side, but it will take, and I know you all know this, many of you have participated in the BVLOS ARC or other aviation rulemaking committees, or in AUVSI's annual Hill Day on Capitol Hill. It takes a lot of poking and prodding sometimes to get just one person to focus on something within the agency or within Capitol Hill. But once you get that one person, that one champion, it really does make a big difference in trying to get whatever it is that you're working on across the finish line, right? Like, you really just need that internal quarterback, that internal champion to just grab onto an issue and take it and run with it. And obviously we've seen, our fair share of challenges lately in getting focus on issues. And I think that's largely due to, drastic cuts to the federal workforce that we've seen, and all that's happening within the administration, and folks taking resignation deals and being let go in some cases. And, it's initially when we started planning this event, and then we started seeing all this information coming out of DOGE and people taking, the fork in the road resignations and things like that, we kind of sat back and looked around and said, are we going to be able to get the number of officials that we need at this event in order to make it a success? And, luckily, as time's gone by and things have panned out, we have a really strong slate of federal agencies and congressional staff attending. And I think that's very encouraging and reassuring to show that the interest is still there and folks still want to hear from this community and folks still want to talk to the regulators in an open forum. I hear from member companies all the time that they derive the most value out of this event when it comes to industry to government connections, right? Everybody who knows AUVSI knows that we have Exponential. It's our huge trade show that we have every year that we had in Houston earlier this year, where you have thousands and thousands and thousands of individuals, but that's a very business to business focused event, right? It's an event where people walk around to booths and make deals and talk to people and see the latest technology. The Drone and AAM Policy Symposium, DAPS, is much more focused on business to government, industry to government connections and relationships, where you walk out of an education session or you walk out of a panel and you see that individual from the FAA that you've been trying to get a hold of, or you see that individual from DOT that you've been trying to get a hold of, and you can pull them aside in the hallway and start having a candid conversation with them off the record, get their honest and open and candid feedback and opinions. And that's really valuable. And that's a big reason why we go through this process of hosting this big event every year. So you guys can have those sort of back of the napkin conversations with people, which is really where, if you know a lot about DC, like that's where a lot of the stuff really gets done, right? Is when you have those private conversations with friends. I mean, Brandon's shaking his head or nodding his head. He and I grabbed dinner when I was in DC last and had a very frank and open and candid conversation where I learned a ton from him that I still use and talk to folks about to this day.
Yeah, the worst way to talk to anybody in the FAA is through email because it's all foilable. And they're sometimes very reluctant and guarded to say certain things when Max is exactly right. DC is built on having conversations over drinks or dinner or lunch or wherever it is. I mean, the old school way of human communication still applies very much in this city. I did want to bring up one point, or I guess question for the group, because this is such an outstanding broad spectrum of Scott. You're up in more Class A realm, Tim, you're down in the low level stuff, which Michelle and I talk about all the time, and Max, you're all over. And so one of the things, and this really highlighted last week, there was a Senate hearing with Mike Torfey, Steve Willoughby, two folks that I've worked with for years, and another gentleman, I can't remember their name. But, the security issue is a problem, right? There's a lot of drug smuggling going on, leveraging drone technology, obviously the stuff going on in Ukraine, and then a couple of thwarted terrorist attacks, leveraging drone technology. And then you also have the traditional aviation side, AOPA, and some of these others. And it seems like these three things, the UAS integration effort, Drones for Good, are all kind of colliding right now. And I think really the impetus is probably Part 108 because they're really trying to expand that envelope in commercial and scale drone operations. How do you see this unfolding? Or is there some folks that are going to have to give here to make this all work and to find the true definition of integration, right? Rather than segregation and all this other stuff.
Yeah, I can take a stab if you like. So, we've had established organizations that have been out there, everything from Flight Safety Foundation, Gamma. They're synonymous with this group here. But from the drone industry, I might mention just those two, and they may not even know who they are or what they exist. Remember, it's our shared airspace. So it's not just for Delta Airlines. It's not just for American Robotics. It's our airspace. So we've got to be able to work together and have those drinks, meet up at those places that have been around long before drones were, and be able to show how we're going to have integrity and safety in the space together, so that we can be adopted together versus segregated. We all understand segregated isn't efficient. It's not effective. It's not the way forward. We got to integrate and do it safely. And so, if we're both in our silos and we continue down that realm, we're not going to get any further ahead. we're going to see those same organizations and unions and labor and bargaining units out on the left and other organizations onto the right. So we got to collaborate and come into the middle. So some of that may be, who knows, Max, maybe it's AUVSI having a meeting in the same time and place as Flight Safety Foundation, right? Or it's Gamma invited to AUVSI Exponential, telling them who they are, what they do. And oh, by the way, if you build quadcopters, maybe you should be part of Gamma, right? And maybe RTCA telling everybody that they don't build air traffic control radars like they started in the 1930s, right? They actually represent the standards and how standards get into the FAA. So I think a lot of that could be, positiveness to help us get there more quickly. Remember, we're in one of the most complicated, regulated things on the planet. Maybe nuclear power has a little bit more, but not much. And so it's daunting for somebody new to come into aviation and, and at the same time went to Walmart or Amazon and bought a quadcopter off the shelf. That's over a half pound. And then they're like, what do you mean I have to register it with this regulatory body, and I have to take training and document all of that. So it's our jobs as mentors of the industry and our associations to get that word out and show them it's a good thing. It's how we integrate and maintain safety in the airspace, and and that we don't have wild rides on social media that there's thousands of nefarious drones in New Jersey and New York taking off every day and every night, right? So that's part of our job as leaderships in the industry.
Yeah, and I'll just respond to that quickly, and just I guess make a shameless plug for AUVSI membership. One of the things that our member companies get from us is that access and that coordination with all those other aviation focused trade associations that we've all mentioned, right? So our president and CEO Michael formerly worked at ALPA, the Airline Pilots Association. I know Scott here formerly worked at the National Business and Aviation Association, NBAA. We work closely with, Airlines for America on the commercial aviation side, AAAE and ACINA on the airport side, Gamma and AOPA on the general aviation side. Work with folks that are fixed base operators or folks in the aerospace supply chain resiliency world, and we do a lot of different work with all those different trade associations, because to your all's point, we're all sharing the airspace together, and it's important that we're all rowing in the same direction. And so we actually go out of our way to engage with the trade associations who represent different segments of the aviation industry, and candidly do not see eye to eye with us on a lot of the issues that we're talking about here today. And we proactively go and bang down those doors and talk to the leadership of those organizations. And Michael, our president and CEO, has been really great about doing that and fostering great relationships with all these other trade association leaders, so we can come together and try to hash out differences and get to a place where we can all coexist in the airspace together. And I think that that's a really important thing. And we've seen the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, try to sort of bring more industry together and put everybody in a room and let those organizations and trade associations hash out their differences and details. And for those who are listening who participated on the Beyond Visual Line of Sight arc, there were a lot of traditional aviation organizations that participated in all those conversations, who many of which ended up dissenting against the ARC report that ultimately came out, right? And we're not going to have a future where everybody can play nice in the sandbox and everybody can coexist in the airspace at higher altitudes and lower altitudes unless all of these trade associations are talking to each other. And that leads me to make one last point, which is we're a part of an organization called the Modern Skies Coalition, which is a group of, I think, like 30 or 35 trade associations all across the space, like everything from tour operators to travel agents to hospitality to commercial aviation to general aviation to drones and AAM, and everything in between. And we try to work closely with those folks on things like ATC modernization reform and NAS modernization reform, and upgrades that the FAA desperately needs to make to some of their old and antiquated technology in order to ensure that all of these operations can happen safely. And I think we all know that commercial aviation and just aviation in general is under a microscope right now, right? Because of all the incidents that we've seen happen between the beginning of this year and now. And that microscope does funnel down to our industry. And keep in mind, what preceded the really unfortunate crash at DCA earlier this year was a lot of focus on our industry and our work because of these, quote unquote drone sightings in and around New Jersey. So there was a lot. There was a big magnifying lens on our industry at the end of last year. And our president and CEO, Michael, if you haven't seen this, I encourage you to do it, went on C-SPAN and did a segment where he took questions from the public on a whole host of different issues about privacy and loitering drones above people's houses. And, why is this drone flying over my backyard and spying on my kids playing in the pool in the backyard? I mean, he got some really tough, pointed questions that I think he did a tremendous job answering. But those types of issues with public acceptance and public engagement are going to continue to arise, and it's forums like this. And David, I commend and applaud you for bringing people together on a consistent basis to talk about these issues, because this is where a lot of these types of forums and these types of conversations are where a lot of legislators, regulators, and industry folks come to learn and derive ideas on how to solve key and critical problems.
And just one thing I wanted to add in terms of collaboration with other associations, like someone mentioned GAMA. So the panel I'm moderating, actually, we have GAMA involved in that, because along with AUVSI, they've been leading a really proactive effort to bring companies that have active certification projects with the FAA focused on remote piloting or autonomy, to bring everyone together around the table with a really broad cross-section of FAA executives and talk through some of the specific operational airspace integration questions the FAA has, and try to answer those to the best degree we can. Obviously, every company is different, but come together on some industry consensus positions, which I think is great, and a really positive step from the FAA. And it's been awesome to see GAMA and AUVSI be able to work together in that effort, because having the trade association convene everyone around the table, I don't think Reliable Robotics on its own would be able to get 30 plus FAA people for 2 hours or a half day even to talk through these issues. So that is really valuable. And then I see in the chat, somebody talked about NACA, National Air Traffic Controllers Association, being part of the discussions. NACA actually has an AAM representative that is extremely smart and super insightful, that's at all these discussions we're having with the FAA, which I think has been highly valuable. So they are part of the process, and we're at least for the segment of industry we're working in, we're trying to bring along all the various stakeholders. There's many of them on different sides of these issues, but we're trying to bring them together, and I think that the associations have done a good job thus far at helping facilitate that.
That's great. Let me just say before, we got about 10 minutes left. We can, great conversation. We'll continue forward, but I just wanted to emphasize one more time, if you have not signed up for the Drone and AAM Policy Symposium, which is next week, and everybody here on this panel will be there in person. You can come talk to us, have follow-up questions. Let's create collaboration and synergy together. Friends of the podcast, using that code at the bottom of the screen there, get $50 off. So go register for that. And then I also just wanted to thank American Robotics. This episode would not be possible without them. Go check out their website, american-robotics.com. And you're obviously hearing from Timothy and his comments today. And so, I just wanted to highlight those two things as we kind of close the last 10 minutes. Keep sending in those questions, and we'll continue forward. Brandon, I'll pass it to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to make a joke. And Scott said really nice things about the NACA rep. I'm personally really good friends with him, and I wouldn't go so far to say that he's that brilliant. He's okay. His head's already big enough. We just need to keep it under control. Michelle knows who I'm talking about. No, there's actually 2 NACA reps at headquarters that are fully dedicated to AAM integration and UAS integration. And there was one person several years ago, but there's just so much work, and it's such a challenging issue that they had to bring in another person to help, because it's such a complicated matter when you talk about the density of some of the controlled airspace that these low-level operations are talking about going in. So I just wanted to throw a little jab at that person. I won't obviously name names, but and then the other thing I just want to throw out, there's a reason why I asked that, and one of the things is, at least on my side, on the security side, obviously, any technology you have is going to be used for both good and bad. And so we have to get the bad under control to make sure that the good has the legs to get to where it needs to be so they can do all these amazing things. The other big thing is also compliance, and something Michelle and I always harp on all the time: educate, make sure to get out there as much as possible. And so I guess for Max, what is AUVSI doing to try to reach out to the I don't want to say standard, but the folks that don't necessarily seek out aviation resources because they just don't know that they're part of the aviation community when they get that drone at Kohl's or Best Buy or whatever. And I know you guys do a tremendous amount of public outreach. So if there's anything that anybody listening can help out, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so we have a couple of different initiatives that we work on, but I think the one that immediately pops into my mind is the Know Before You Fly initiative, the Know Before You Fly campaign, which is a congressionally appropriated initiative that we work directly with the FAA on to put out disclaimers, videos, content, education to the public who is interested in going into a Best Buy or a Walmart and purchasing a drone, and then not necessarily knowing what they can and can't do, right? And not necessarily, to the earlier point that was made, not necessarily knowing that that drone is supposed to be registered, right? Whether you have your photography enthusiast who buys a drone just to take aerial photography and sort of mess around with it and have fun, all the way to your individual who starts a roofing business or a contracting business and wants to go purchase a drone that they use as a critical tool to support their day-to-day business and their livelihood. So I definitely encourage you, if you just Google Know Before You Fly, you'll be able to see more information of what we put out there. There's lots of good videos and hands-on content just to make sure that folks know what they can and can't do with drones. They know what a TFR is. They know what geofencing is. They know what, they know what all of this critical information is, because you look at a drone and you think, hey, that's cool, I want to go buy one of those things. But what people don't understand is that they're pretty complex machines, and you have to know how to operate them in the appropriate way, or else you can get yourself into some trouble that you might not necessarily be trying to get into, right? We say that there are folks out there who are reckless. We say that there are folks out there who are nefarious, and we say that there are folks out there who are just uninformed, right? And you don't want to be in that camp, that camp of being an uninformed drone operator who doesn't know what they can and can't do, because we've seen how that can wreak havoc on an airport or on a commercial flight or on a helicopter flight or whatever the case is. I mean, there's multiple examples that we can point to of individuals who did something that they weren't supposed to do, and what the broad implications and, and sometimes, in some cases, civil and criminal penalties can result. So definitely would encourage folks to check out the Know Before You Fly initiative. We also have some trusted operator and sort of like certification programs and training programs and things like that we offer, and that we partner with outside organizations to just make sure that the industry is staying above board and being safe, because it really, all it takes is one catastrophic incident, which we obviously hope does not happen, that can completely upend the entire industry and everything that it's working to accomplish, and everything that you all are working with us and with others to accomplish as well.
It's good. Yeah, and I mean, on that note, in terms, and Brandon, you focus a lot as well on like the counter drone side of things and advising folks on that. And at Equidyne, it's amazing with the radar side of the house. We're seeing that convergence of both spaces. We do a lot with counter drone, like as a company, especially overseas and elsewhere, where we're outfitting all these groups. But then there's so much going on with drone enablement, ground-based DAA with radar, and I'm literally seeing the same cities and projects that some of us aren't together, looking at both, like calling me back going, actually, can this also do, counter drone, not just for our DFR, drone as first responder program, but can you make the radar be able to see, aircraft and drones and alert if there's a drone that's within this space, and vice versa. Hey, we put it up just for alerting, but actually, can you enable our drone to fly further and not just tell us when there's, so it's wild to see that. And I'm kind of curious, because we're heavily focused today on aviation enablement, right? And national airspace integration, drones and aircraft. But I don't know. I mean, like Timothy, you mentioned multiple products. One is like an enablement drone flying continuously, getting, be able to send data back. But then your other product is also a drone on drone, net capture. So you have both sides of the fence as well. And I feel like almost all of us are kind of seeing that split. But I just wanted to see if any of you guys, but I mean, T3, I'll throw it to you. If you just have thoughts on that, the importance of the integration of counter and, enablement, or what you're seeing in the industry, or any comments on that?
Yeah, I'm gonna get there in about 30 seconds, but there's a couple things I want to bring up that Max brought up as well. I know we're going to wrap it up here in a couple minutes, but there's certain things we got to come together as an industry and as a regulator to get there, right? So non-cooperative traffic, we got to fix that, right? So in the United States, I have a Cessna 172. I fly regularly. I would never ever fly without ADSB. Wouldn't do it. Why would I do it unless I want to, not be safe? That's another safety layered system for me. So if we can get AOPA and some of those organizations on board, and agricultural pilots, et cetera, and show them how this is an enabler. It's not a negative of being able to do that. That helps reduce our requirement of being able to not go on beyond visual line of sight and know that we can see each other and we can avoid each other and that we can do all of those things we need to do. And number two, Part 108 is crucial. A private pilot's license takes hundreds of hours and months for someone to get at a flight school or with an instructor. Going online and being able to get your Part 107 license in a few days with minimal training. I would be squeamish if I were on the other side of that from, Flight Safety Foundation or Airline Pilots Association, et cetera. We got to have Part 108. We got to move in our industry to that next level. So those two key components coming together will be enablers for us and build trust. It'll probably be the enabler of us being able to come to the FAA. Max just talked about, I think you rattled off at least 50 associations in like 30 seconds. So if all these associations came to the FAA with different inputs and weren't together and didn't have that drink in DC first and be able to hash it out, argue over that item and get to a center point, the FAA couldn't take all of that. There would be a lot of arguing and a lot of slow on the final regulation of what that is. But getting back to your question, David, these systems are all coming together and we got to look at how to integrate them safely, smartly, and efficiently. Our customers only have so many resources and dollars, right? And they want to do this, whether it's a police force in a city or whether it's all the way up through the Department of Defense and everything in between. So it's our job to work together to show them how they can max utilize and be most efficient and safe with those resources. Some of the customers, they don't even want to operate the resources. They want it as a service. They want the companies like us to come in, set it up, and operate those counter UAS systems or set up that automated data flow into their data lake, whether it's Microsoft Azure, Google, or Amazon. So because they don't want to build that expertise and all that's required to operate in an aircraft. And Max said that, I'm hearing less in the industry. A decade ago, people used to call these things hammers and screwdrivers. They're not. They're aircraft, no matter how big they are. So it's our job to keep conveying that. And so, I know we've only got a minute or two, but we would love to host anybody listening today. Please come to our Baltimore area headquarters. We have a 3-kilometer beyond visual line of sight waiver in place, where we actually have Echodyne panels on the roof, along with other equipment, to be able to operate safely and show off our systems and show how they can be integrated or used alone. And so we'd love to host anybody anytime. So and thanks again for having me here today.
So
Awesome.
David, I'm gonna run you over by 1 minute, and I apologize. But so just real fast on the airspace surveillance issue, that there's already a model built for what we really need inside the United States for low level surveillance, and that's the integration between the DoD and the FAA as far as airspace surveillance for NORAD, NORTHCOM. They're responsible for watching everything coming in and out of the country, and there's ways to do that. If we delegate that down to a lower level, like the state level, and had a pay-to-play system, and I know I'm going to make Max a little uncomfortable because I know that this is a contentious kind of topic, but if the states were given some level of authority over low-level airspace, and they were to invest in that surveillance picture at the lower levels, and then you had to pay a fee to access that as a service, it could pay for itself. It's the exact same concept also of municipality ran airports, right? You have to pay to leverage that airport, and people do. And that's the business model for running a functional airport. There are some subsidies through AIP program and others through federal government tax dollars, but that type of system could be developed to provide a low-level surveillance network across the United States with some regulatory change and whatnot. So
awesome. Appreciate it, guys. Well, we're right on the hour. And I'm sure people may have, back-to-back meetings with this, but thank you, each of you, for your time, and everybody out there listening. And hopefully we'll see all y'all in person next week at the symposium. So we'll talk soon. We'll see you again next week live as well.
take care.
See you there. Bye-bye.
Thank you.